Hey there, it's Olivia Savannah here from Olivia's Catastrophe, and today I'm here to give you my November wrap-up. I read the most that I have read in quite a while in November, and I'm so excited to tell you about all of my thoughts on all of the books. I will have content warnings for the books that I mention in the description down below, so if you want those, that's where you can find them. And without further ado, let's get right down to the books. So the biggest book that I read in November at over 1,000 pages was Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke. I'm trying to casually work through the oldest books on my TBR, and this was the oldest big book on my TBR after finishing War and Peace, and unfortunately I really didn't like this one. It's one of those books that I think was something I would have picked up when I was younger rather than now, but it just was not very good. So in this one we are in London and magic has been gone from England for a very long time. There are people who study magic, but there are no practicing magicians. And then comes Mr. Norrell, who is a practicing magician, and he doesn't want anybody else to be a magician. And then Jonathan Strange comes along, who is also a magician, and some things start to happen following that. And what I expected from this book was for it to be a bit of a commentary on the politics of magic in this world, and for that to kind of have a deeper meaning about power and about positions of power and who is given that power, and maybe some politics in the world when it comes to who is a magician, who isn't, and some kind of plot as well. But it was just so boring for ages, absolutely ages. Up until page 800, I would like to say that nothing of significant happens, and you cannot have that with a book. You cannot have 800 pages of setup. No, you cannot do it. Stop writing 1,000 pages books with lots of setup and no plot until the very end. And then when we get to that plot that you've waited so long to get to, it's not worth it. It's not even amazingly complex or amazingly unique. It just felt like such a boring, dry, standard fantasy book, and it did not need to be that long, and I was so frustrated by the end of it. It also felt very male-centered, which is very interesting because this is written by a woman, but there were two main male characters and there were some secondary male ones, and then there were like wives, and they kind of got these very small wifey kind of roles where they needed saving and things like that. So it felt a bit, I don't know, outdated. I know that this is a historical fiction, so it is set in the past, so I understand that there are standards that you have to abide to if you want to make it historically accurate, but at the same time it just felt so boring male fantasy by a woman that it shocked me. I read the first half of this myself, and then I read the other half by audiobook, otherwise I would not have finished, but it's safe to say that this is not a keeper for me. I'm very disappointed, but I'm glad to have that kicked off my TBR. My reading mood switched to young adult contemporary, and that was all I wanted to read. So I read Solitaire by Alice Oseman. This was my first Alice Oseman novel, and I have an unpopular opinion for this one, but it is a positive unpopular opinion. I've seen so many people on BookTube who don't like Solitaire, but I actually really enjoyed this one. And the quote on the cover for the first time, it's just the most accurate quote ever. It says, "The Catcher in the Rye for the Digital Age" by the Times, and that is exactly how I would describe this book. We're following Tori, and she is the older sister to Charlie, who you might know from the Heartstopper series, and this is her story about her life. And it quickly becomes clear to me that Tori is struggling a lot. I think she's struggling for a lot of reasons, but I think one of them is also supporting Charlie as he's going through a very difficult time himself, and that's having a toll on her mental health alongside other things. And in school there's this thing called Solitaire, which is hijacking the computers and hijacking the school, and it's a bit of a mystery to find out who is the one who is doing the hijacking. I really hated The Catcher in the Rye. I could not stand that book, but this was just so good. I think one of the things that it does well is that it names what Tori is going through. Of course, for a while it doesn't, and you have to kind of understand and feel with her and see how she's feeling before it kind of names what she's experiencing. But the fact that it actually names it was quite powerful to me. It did a good job of showing two different characters who are both really emotionally struggling, but both emotionally struggling and presenting in different ways. It kind of reminds me of My Heart and Other Black Holes, where you have one who's going through a difficult mental health time and is just being so enthusiastic and so bubbly and so happy throughout it, and forcing that kind of narrative to everyone else, whereas Tori is very much not bothered about forcing that narrative. She doesn't care what anybody thinks, she just wants to wallow in her feelings. Michael is an absolute sweetheart. I loved his character so much. I think he was just a bright piece of sunshine that had its own clouds but was still trying to shine as brightly as it possibly could. Don't know where I was going with that, but Michael was one of the best things about this book. And then it was nice to see the family feelings. It was nice to see some of the Heartstopper characters show up every now and again. Mostly I just thought this was just such an emotional journey, and sometimes I didn't even want to read it because it was quite taxing for me, maybe because I could relate to Tori in some elements. I do think it did fall into the young adult contemporary predictability. I am an adult reading this book and not a young adult, but I figured out who Solitaire was from the very start, and I figured out why Solitaire was doing what they were doing from the very start. I don't think that was surprising to me whatsoever. The book ended kind of where I expected the book to end, but I was having such a good time on this journey that I would recommend this one. For young adult contemporary, I continued on with reading Yes, No, Maybe So by Becky, Albertalli and Aisha Saaed, and this one follows these two main characters. One of them is a Muslim and the other one is Jewish, and they end up canvassing for an election because of different reasons, and they end up canvassing together, and they kind of go through talking about what it's like canvassing, what it's like having this political stance where it seems like everything's sinking and everything is going against you, and how much politics really matters and how it's not something that you can ignore and just overlook. I feel a bit in two minds about this book. It very much has an agenda that it's trying to fulfill. I can tell that the writers went into this one wanting to talk about politics, wanting to put that at the forefront, and it shows, because the story feels very much cobbled around that rather than a story where it kind of weaves those themes in, which I think is unfortunate because it sucked a lot of enjoyment out of the story for me. But it was still a very good time. I think a book like this is quite important. I think a lot of teenagers will probably stumble across this and be able to learn from it and kind of see themselves reflected in it. It's got queer relationships, which is always nice to see, and it's also got some like understanding and educating of Jewish culture and also Muslim culture and religion, and Jewish culture and religion, I should say. So it was kind of nice to see those things. It was nice to see it woven in. The two main characters are really nice. The plot was nice. It was all nice. It was just a very middle of the road 3-star read, and I think it could have been improved if it felt more like a story and less like something that was trying to teach me when I'm reading a fiction book. But overall, I can't fault it for anything. I just can't love it more for anything in particular either. I finally finished Opposite of Always by Justin A. Reynolds. I have been reading this one for quite a while and I only had a few pages left, but I kept putting it off. And this one is young adult, kind of sci-fi I would say, but it feels like a young adult contemporary with a few sci-fi elements. In this one we're following our main character, and he is a black teenager and he gets stuck in a time loop. And he's in a relationship with this girl during the time loop, but she has a condition that can be very fatal, and he keeps trying his best to save her in this time loop. I really like this one, and I think it did the time loop story well. I love time loops. I think they can be done very badly. What this one did so well was that the time loop was not for a day, it was not for a week, it was for I think a solid 3 or 4 months. So that time loop was a long period of time, which means that lots of different things can happen, and even if the same reoccurrences are happening, there's just so much leeway into what the consequences can be. So it means that it never got boring, it never got repetitive. I loved seeing that. We're following black characters, and while there are some moments where I would say themes to do with being black and black identity do come into it, largely, for the most part, they're just black characters in a story. I love seeing that. I think we need to see more of it as well, so that was very enjoyable. Our main character is the sweetest, cutest, most genuine guy, and I absolutely loved following him. It was just a joy. Sometimes he makes really bad choices, but you can see why he does them, even if it's frustrating. He's just trying his best. He's just so genuine. It was so nice to read his perspective. Loved the love interest. She was amazing and so funny and sweet as well. And we've got a nice friendship group, which is very tight, the three of them, and it was just a joy to see a kind of found family feeling friendship where it's not very big, it's only 3 people, but it still had that family element to it. Franny in this one, who is one of the friendship group, deserves the entire world. He's just been through so much, but he's just so lovely. I think I just loved the characters and the fact that the time loop went on for quite a long period of time. It just made this book a very fun, enjoyable read. It touches on some topics, doesn't sink too deep into them, but doesn't do it at a surface level so it feels ingenuine. I thought that was very well balanced. I will say the only thing is the ending. The ending feels a bit rushed. The ending is not exactly where I wanted things to land, but I was okay with it. Just didn't stick the landing just as much as I would have liked, but I will definitely read more by Justin A. Reynolds for sure. I read Tash Hart's Tolstoy by Kathryn Ormsbee, and in this one we follow an ace main character who has this web vlog series where they're adapting Anna Karenina for the contemporary times on their YouTube channel, and it blows up and she's suddenly famous and all of these dreams are coming true. So she's dealing with that while she's figuring out her asexuality, and lots of things are going down with her friends. It's coming to the end of secondary school where you're thinking about university and everything. All of that is happening in her life at the same time. I enjoyed this one. I didn't love it, I didn't strongly dislike it, but I'm very, very glad I've read it. I feel like I still haven't read as many books with ace main characters as I would like, so it's still something I'm learning a lot about, and this explains some things very well. I liked the way that you got to see a YouTuber, like a web vlog thing. I think it did it accurately. Sometimes they do it so inaccurately, but it did it accurately, and it was just fun to see and be along that journey with her. I liked the friendship group. It was really nice seeing how tight they were, how genuine, and of course they have some problems that they have to work through in this book. It was also a very interesting depiction of family. I feel like oftentimes when I see sister relationships in books, they're always so tight, they're always so close, or they're always in an absolute rivalry because it's a fantasy or something and they're sworn enemies or something like that. And it's so rare that in contemporary I see the bit in the middle where you're just not close with your sibling, and that's fine. That's how some people are. So it's kind of nice to see that represented in a book for once, at least. Any book that I've picked up, I don't think I've seen it before. So that was nice. Most of all, again, it was just really, really nice. There was nothing that blew me away with this book, but there's nothing that I didn't like at all. I saw the direction it was going in. Once again, I am aware that I'm not the target audience, but it was just a good read. And I think I just really like young adult contemporary that's nice. I don't expect it to be more than 3 stars. I still want to read it nonetheless. So next I decided to read 3 funny picture books. This is the first one I read, and this is by Adam Mansbach. I had such a blast reading this. It was so much fun. It's just funny, it's just enjoyable. I think it's a perfect stocking filler or gift to give to new parents because they can probably relate to this a lot. As someone who is au paired, even I could relate to this book, and I just thought it was funny, enjoyable. The illustrations were good. I'm very bad at sleeping well, unfortunately, so even I could relate to some of this because apparently I have the sleeping habits of a 3-year-old toddler. Continuing in on this series, I read this book next. And again, I really enjoyed this. I've also worked as a teaching assistant at school, and lunchtimes can sometimes be such a difficult time because children don't want to eat. They just don't like food. And it was funny. Again, the illustrations were a joy. There's nothing more I could say about these books other than they were really good. I just want to start talking about the picture books that I read a bit more on my channel. And then last but not least, I read the last one in the kind of loosely related trilogy. That's this book. My least favourite of the 3 because I think that it had less rhyme to it, less rhyme and rhythm, which I think is always a good thing for a picture book to have, and the other 2 did that very well. And the jokes were a bit more, they were less cynical funny and more like my life is actually a struggle. So it was a bit less funny than the others, but it was still a very good time, a very good quick read with nice illustrations. I also read a play. I read Paradise by Kae Tempest, and this is a reimagining of a part of Odysseus's journey and the story of Odysseus and Philoctetes, or Philoctetes, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but yes, that's what this one is about. It's kind of a contemporary take on this, and I had to warm up to this one, but once I did, I really did enjoy it. I think in the beginning, I was just a bit lost. The chorus is a bit weird. They kind of have a rhythm going, but not quite a rhythm. And maybe that text would work better on a stage. I always acknowledge that when it comes to a play. But I thought it was interesting how it did contemporary with the mythology elements into it. I like the use of repetition at times and the way that the chorus kind of spoke over the main plot and the other characters that were speaking to include some humor, but also just include some commentary. In this one, the chorus are refugees who can't get to their destination, they're homeless, and I thought that added an interesting touch to the story because it was looking at that and the state of the refugees in the refugee crisis in our current political climate, as well as looking at war and the effects of war, because it was relating to the war that happens in the mythology and how that's displacing lots of people, but then it was kind of eking in some of our current political situation into the commentary, and I think it did that very, very well. That comes into the second half of the play, and that's when I really started to warm up to it. The ending was absolutely perfect. I would not have wanted this play to end in any other way, and it wrapped up so poetically and beautifully that I was incredibly satisfied. So even though I felt lukewarm at the beginning, I will say that the second half of this was really good, and I should read more books by Kae Tempest because I've heard that their books are very good. Then I read a short story collection called Objects of Desire by Clare Sestanovich, and this was a brand new favourite for me. I absolutely loved this short story collection. So in this short story collection, you're just following a range of young adult women. I would say they're about 20 to 30s, and they're just going through their everyday lives. That is literally all that they are doing, but everything seems to kind of, in some way or another, be going wrong for these women. They're at what they are supposed to call the prime of their life, where everything should be taking off, they should be falling in love, they should be getting steady jobs, they should be having the time of their lives, but they are not, for different reasons. The writing in this is absolutely amazing. I can't believe this is Sestanovich's debut. I will read anything more that she writes, because the way that she writes these are so quiet. It's every day, and then the characters will do something and you'll be like, that's exactly how I feel, that's exactly what I think. And it nails those small details incredibly well to make it feel authentic, to make it feel realistic. And I'm not going to say that all of these characters make the right choices. Some of them are quite unlikable, and I'm the worst at liking unlikable characters. I usually just don't get along with them whatsoever. But I kind of liked all of these women, and I really liked seeing their stories. I also was very impressed by the quiet use of metaphor. So there's some images maybe that keep repeating themselves in the short story, but you won't even notice, you won't even clock until the end of the short story comes about, and it all just fits together in a moment, and you're like, wow, so that image actually is relating to this, and it just fits everything perfect and wraps up the short story in the perfect way. I was just so happy at the end of each of these short stories because they felt absolutely perfect. There is nothing I would change. I really recommend this short story collection. Then I indulged myself by reading Hamlet, Poem Unlimited by Harold Bloom. It's quite short, and this is a straight up analysis of Hamlet. Nothing more, nothing less. And it was fantastic. I really enjoyed reading this book. I think what it does so well is that you can tell that Harold Bloom absolutely adores Shakespeare, absolutely loves Hamlet, and that love is poured into his analysis and commentary, but doesn't overshadow it. He's still being quite analytical with it, and yet you can just tell that he also admires Shakespeare. It's just a very nice blend to read. He had very unique takes that I'd never considered, so it opened Hamlet to me in a way that I hadn't even thought about it before, and I was like, whoa, how did I never think about this? But he takes minute details and really looks into them and explores them, which was really nice for someone who's a big Shakespeare nerd like me to read. I will say this book is probably best if you've read a few of his plays, because he makes a lot of references to other plays and sometimes even spoils the outcome a bit. So make sure you've read any play that has Falstaff in it, Henry IV parts 1 and 2 especially. Probably read Midsummer Night's Dream before reading this. Definitely read Hamlet. And also at the end there's quite a close analysis to Endgame by Samuel Beckett, so it's useful if you read that play too, just so that that comparison is not wasted on you. But overall, very good read. I had a nice hour or two reading this one. Then I joined in with Canongate's read-alongs. Canongate, the publisher, are doing read-alongs every month, so if you want to read along with us, you can check it out. And I read The Coward by Jared McGinnis, which was a very interesting experience because this one follows a man who gets into a car crash and the car crash leaves him injured. He is now a disabled wheelchair user for the rest of his life, and he's coming to terms with that. He's coming to terms with the fact that he's in debt, and he hasn't talked to his father for 10 years, but now he has no choice but to go and live with that father. And it's about their relationship, what happened in the past that led them to have that big gap of time away from each other, but also their relationship in the present day when our main character is dealing with all of this emotional trauma, physical trauma, and working through it all while also being with his father. What also makes this one very interesting is that our main character is called Jared and the author is called Jared, and you kind of end up thinking how much of this is fiction, how much of this is fact. Our author is also disabled after an accident, so you definitely end up wondering where it toes the line between fact and fiction, and it is a fiction story, but it's very interesting to see those correlations. I do think I struggled with this book quite a lot. Jared, our main character, not the author, our main character, is incredibly unlikable. And you know me, I struggle with unlikable characters. I struggle a lot because I just don't like them. So I didn't like his main character. I did not like the way he described other people. I think sometimes the descriptions were quite offensive. His sense of humor is very peculiar. Sometimes it was funny, sometimes it was just too offensive for me. And while it does not excuse his behavior, you can see that he's going through a lot. He's got all of these traumas that he's dealing with and unpacking and unraveling, so you give him some leeway. But sometimes I think he pushes the boundaries of how much leeway we should give him as a character. So I personally struggled with the unlikable character. This one is a character-driven story as well, so I'm not going to really say there's a plot per se, but that relationship with the father is so complex and so interesting to see unravel. The chapters are flipping between the past and present day, so the more you see about the past, the more you understand why they are the way they are in the present, and I really thought that was cleverly done and worked so well for the story. The father is called Jack and I adored him. I thought he was fantastic. It was interesting to see how far he's come in terms of the past storyline to the present, but even then in the present he's just so accepting, deals with Jared, takes on some of that humour, but it's just so genuine as well. So I really liked his character, really liked their relationship, really liked the timeline span. I just struggled with the main character. I would also like to say that Simone liked this book and does recommend it. So while I struggled with it but enjoyed some elements, I think other people could enjoy this one a whole lot more. Prism by David Kae. So this one is about David Kae's experience growing up and going to university and living with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, which is his disability. I read this one in the span of 2 days. I raced through it. I thought it was very, very, very good. What I really liked about this one in particular is the fact that it's not dealing with other people's expectations or reactions very much. So maybe he does experience ableism in his life, but it's not like he excluded it entirely, but it's not about that. It's not about how able-bodied people view disabled people or how that perception impacts his life, but more so it's focused on him, on his disabled friends and their experiences. So it's about what it's like being disabled and going to university, how he managed to do that, some of the crises that he's had and how he's overcome them, also some of the emotional turmoils and emotional experiences he's had because of his particular disability, and also sometimes realizations that he's had about disability and other people with disability around him, because not all disabilities are the same. And I just loved that shift of focus, because while I have read quite a few disabled narratives, I just don't think I've seen one which just so strongly focuses on the person alone and themselves rather than us as a whole. And I think there's definitely room for both stories. We need both stories, we need both narratives. It was just refreshing to see this one. So I really did enjoy this one. I did learn a lot. It's written in a very simple, easy to engage, easy to understand way, and I think lots of people can learn from it, fly through it, and just find it very intriguing as well. So I recommend this one. I read another memoir, and that is Hope Not Fear by Hassan Akkad, which It's a new favourite, it's a 5 stars. It's just really hard to call it a new favourite because I just wish this book didn't have to exist, but it has to exist because people go through this. I'm not a crier. I get emotionally moved by stories, but I'm usually not so emotionally impacted that I'm crying, not so emotionally impacted that I can't read a book because it's just so emotionally heavy. This book, I was procrastinating. I was avoiding it because it weighed on my soul, because it is true. So I should probably tell you what it's about. This one follows Hassan Akkad, who is Syrian, and it's his experience protesting in Syria, the consequences of protesting in Syria, and what that was like, some of the hardest moments that he's been through because of it. And then it continues on to follow his refugee story, what it was like as a refugee trying to seek safety somewhere in some country. And then last but not least, it moves on to him serving in a COVID ward and what that experience was like. So there's so much in this book, so much. That's his life, so much that he's been through. All content warnings down below. He's just, I don't have the words for this review. He has been through so much difficulty and so many hard times, and he recounts them for you so you can understand why refugees are making the journeys that they are and why you should be supporting them and helping them and not trying to kick them out of the country. I feel like it's hard for me to imagine anyone reading this book and not having their perspective changed if they think refugees should stay where they are. I read this one physically for a bit, and then I was struggling with it emotionally, personally, so I thought I will switch to the audiobook. That was a bad idea. I read 3 chapters, and you can hear Hassan Akkad's voice trembling as he recounts some of the really difficult moments. So then I had to switch back to reading it physically, because my heart, it couldn't take it. And even though there is just so much darkness, so many injustices that he has experienced, this book still manages to preach a message of hope instead of fear, and I really admire that he could shape his story in a way that should bring hope to other people, but is also quite an activist call to get people to do things, to jumpstart and start moving. I definitely started to do a few more things after reading this one. Even though Hassan Akkad is a Syrian refugee who's gone through so many things, I'm trying not to tell you so you can read it for yourself, he still has moments in this where he checks his privilege. And I'm just like, wow, the fact that you can be so self-aware after what you've gone through and still check your privilege, whereas there are people who have everything and never do, I found that very impressive. He's aware that he's white passing and that helps him. He's aware that in terms of being a refugee, being from Syria sometimes gets you fast-tracked above other refugees who might have different experiences that might have been just as difficult but are not as in the media as the Syrian refugee crisis was and is. So it was just so interesting to see this one, and also I found it very interesting. I've read quite a few COVID narratives now that are memoirs, to see how he reflected how the COVID situation can make people understand and emphasize with refugees a bit more than they possibly could, but also highlights how it's usually the underrepresented groups who are working within COVID wards and facing those difficult times. All in all, it was just absolutely stellar. I don't really know if I can say anything that's on equal par to you reading the book and experiencing it. There's nothing I can say that is on level with this book. It's just a whole different level. Please read it. Please read it if you can. I read a poetry chapbook, and that is How the First Sparks Became Visible by Simone and Atangana Bekono. And this one was sent to me in a book box from New Dutch Writing, which highlights Dutch books that have been translated into English. So if you're looking to read more translated fiction, you should definitely check out their list of books. This is a poetry collection, and I don't believe I have much experience reading translated poetry, so that it's not a first for me, but it's still something quite new that I'm unfamiliar with. Definitely never read a whole translated collection, and for the most part I thought this one was okay. With poetry, it's a bit hit or miss sometimes, because you'll have poetry types that you really like and poetry types that you just don't connect with as much, and it's about knowing what those are so then you can find the right collections for you. And this, unfortunately, is not my personal type. I would really recommend this to either poetry beginners or people who have started to read poetry quite a bit and are ready for the next level up, because it's not quite beginner, but it's not full of imagery and you need to really analyze all of the literary devices to understand what's going on. It's not that either. It was nice. I don't think the theme sunk in for me personally. I would have wanted a bit more. There was imagery in it, which was nice, but again, I would have wanted a bit more for my own personal taste, but it was still a nice poetry collection. I don't have much more to say than that. So those are all of the books that I read in November. Really happy. Hopefully I can bring this reading energy over to December and continue reading old books on my TBR while getting to some new stuff too. Please let me know in the comment section down below, have you read any of these books? What are your thoughts, or what is the last book you finished reading? Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, hit the subscribe button if you want to see more, and don't forget to hit the notification bell to be updated every time I have a new video. And you know what they say, onwards and upwards. Excelsior. Charlie or Nick? Charlie. Oh, man, can't remember which one.